the Red Sea, Suez, and one of the narrowest yet most critical choke points on Earth, Bab al-Mandab. A crisis here doesn't just shake the region, it can ripple into oil prices, insurance costs, supply chains, and global trade, and Yemen sits right on the edge of that strait, at the center of a war that's been dismissed for years as local, even though it's deeply embedded in global power dynamics. In this video, I'm going to explain clearly why Yemen turned into a never-ending war through state collapse, proxy conflict, and maritime trade. Let's start with why Yemen is so strategic. Yemen lies in the southwest of the Arabian Peninsula, with a long coastline along the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The key to this geography is the Bab al-Mandab Strait, a narrow passage that connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. The route that continues from there to the Suez Canal is one of the world's main corridors for maritime trade and for a significant share of oil transported by sea. That's why the balance of power in Yemen has never been an only domestic issue. Tension at a tiny point on the map can end up affecting supermarket shelves, fuel prices, and freight costs thousands of kilometers away. But explaining Yemen only through choke points would still be incomplete. Even before the war, Yemen was struggling with a fragile economy, widespread poverty, and weak institutions. So this isn't a simple cliché like a war over rich resources. The real knot is the overlap of a weak state structure, identity tensions, a patronage-based political order, external interventions, and deepening security problems. In the background of modern Yemen, there are two separate political legacies. For a period, there were two states, North Yemen and South Yemen. In 1990, they unified and formed the Republic of Yemen. On paper, it looked like a major step forward, but unification meant one country, not one system. Institutions, security structures, local power balances, and identity perceptions did not merge overnight. Early tensions, especially in the south, strengthened the feeling that we are losing in this union, and that fragility only deepened over time. The key figure of that era was Ali Abdullah Saleh. For years, Saleh governed the country through a security-centered approach, relying on tribal balances and patronage networks. Instead of building strong institutions, loyalty networks became the foundation of the system. Corruption allegations spread, resource distribution was widely seen as unfair, and politics often survived through crisis management rather than durable governance. A structure like that can produce stability for a while, but in the long run, it builds up resentment. In Yemen, that's exactly what happened. There was a state on the surface, but it gradually hollowed out. Now let's talk about the Houthis. The Houthis, known by their own name, Ansar Allah, emerged mainly among Zaidi communities in northern Yemen. In the 1990s, the movement grew around religious education and identity protection under frameworks associated with names like Believing Youth. Over time, however, the line hardened. As Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi became prominent, the movement shifted toward a more political and confrontational stance against corruption, external influence, and regional pressures. Throughout the 2000s, Yemen's security language became heavier. After 9/11, a new security environment formed under the banner of counterterrorism, and it further disrupted an already fragile internal balance. As the state's coercive reflexes increased, the Houthi movement increasingly defined itself not only as an identity cause, but as a resistance project. This is where the conflict spiral kicks in. The more the state represses, the more the movement arms itself. The stronger the movement becomes, the harsher the state reacts. In Yemen, that cycle expanded over years and eventually pushed the country toward a major rupture. By 2011, the Arab Spring reached Yemen. Protests grew, the regime shook, and divisions appeared inside the military. Eventually, Ali Abdullah Saleh stepped down, and authority transferred to Abduwadu Mansour Hadi. On paper, this was a transition. A new era was supposed to begin. More inclusive politics would be built, and institutions would be repaired. In practice, Yemen's transition failed to produce a strong center, because Hadi did not inherit a unified state. The military was fragmented into rival factions. In the south, separatist currents were gaining strength again. The economy was deteriorating. Security vacuums created space for radical organizations. And most importantly, across the country, the state was increasingly drifting away from being a mechanism that brings order to people's lives. In such conditions, the actors who gain ground are the ones who are organized, move fast, and can provide security, services, or a sense of order in a given area. In Yemen, the Houthis became one of those actors filling the vacuum.
In September 2014, the Houthis captured the capital, Sana'a. That was the turning point that reshaped Yemen's fate. Hadi was forced to resign. Later, he fled to Aden and announced he was withdrawing that resignation. Yemen effectively split into two competing centers. By 2015, the conflict had turned into a full-scale civil war. But from that point on, it was no longer only a question of who will govern inside Yemen. Regional rivalry openly entered the battlefield. Saudi Arabia viewed the Houthi advance as a threat in two ways. First, border security. Second, the fear that Iranian influence would be carried into the Arabian Peninsula. In 2015, a Saudi-led coalition intervened with airstrikes, a naval blockade, and limited ground operations. The goal was to strengthen Hadi's government and push the Houthis back. But a quick victory didn't happen. Yemen's geography, the resilience of local networks, the multi-actor structure on the ground, and outside support constantly reshaping the balance, these factors turned the war into a war of attrition. On the other side is the Iran dimension. Strong claims that Iran provided the Houthis with weapons, technology, training, and political support turned Yemen into one of the sharpest proxy arenas in the Iran-Saudi rivalry. The key point here is this. In a proxy war logic, rivals avoid fighting each other directly. Instead, they wear each other down through local partners. That prolongs the conflict. Because the battlefield is not designed to deliver a clean conclusion, it becomes a pressure tool that is kept alive so the other side doesn't win. What Yemen has shown for years is exactly that. Front lines shift sometimes, but the logic of the war does not change. And Yemen was never a simple two-sided battlefield. Over time, southern separatist structures like the Southern Transitional Council gained strength. In some areas, al-Qaeda-linked groups and other militant networks found space. Local actors, tribes, and different armed formations backed by regional powers all became part of the equation. The result is that Yemen turned into a place where multiple wars run simultaneously and overlap. That makes peace far harder, because a single agreement doesn't bind a single reality. The more multi-actor the battlefield becomes, the more complex it is to bring everyone to the same table. In 2022, ceasefires reduced the intensity of fighting to some extent. In 2023, the restoration of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, brokered by China, was seen as a development that could ease proxy tensions around Yemen. But that does not mean Yemen's war automatically ends, because even if proxy pressure decreases, Yemen's internal power balances, zones of de facto control, economic collapse, and institutional breakdown remain. The Houthis maintained their de facto control in the north, blockade and economic pressures continued, and a political settlement remained fragile. And then the file returned to the center of global attention, the Red Sea. The Houthi missile and drone capability, attacks tied to broader regional crises, and actions targeting commercial vessels pushed Yemen back into the global conversation under the headline of security of world trade. Targeting commercial vessels in the Red Sea led to route changes, higher insurance costs, and cascading effects across global shipping. That, in turn, caused major powers and regional actors to treat Yemen not only as a humanitarian catastrophe, but as a strategic security issue again. So let's ask the question directly. Why doesn't Yemen's war end? The first reason is state collapse. When the state collapses, the actors filling the vacuum are difficult to eliminate in a single stroke. Power disperses, localizes, and different authorities emerge in different regions. The second reason is the proxy war logic. Regional powers use the battlefield as a tool of pressure for their own interests, making compromise harder. The third reason is multi-actor fragmentation. Peace in Yemen doesn't come from two signatures, because there aren't only two decisive actors on the ground. And the fourth reason is geography and maritime trade. A war on the coast of a choke point like Bab el-Mandab inevitably draws global attention, and that keeps Yemen tied to a larger game. Yemen is one of the clearest examples of how local grievances can turn into a prolonged war when they combine with regional rivalries and global trade networks. Front lines may shift, maps may change, and diplomatic winds may turn, but as long as the underlying dynamics stay the same, producing a lasting solution through military means alone is extremely difficult. Yemen's story shows this clearly. When a country's internal fragility merges with external interventions, the war doesn't just continue, it opens the door to further crises. I'll keep covering cases like this with maps, timelines, and clear breakdowns of the actors on the ground. In the comments, tell me which country or which crisis you want next.